the honeymoon phase, a blissful, carefree period, and in that phase you can find little to no faults. It usually lasts a few months as well, and on that note, I've had this MacBook Pro 14-inch for just around about 2 months now, so it's fair to say that the honeymoon phase for this brand new MacBook Pro is over. Sadly, it's over. So after that initial honeymoon phase with this particular laptop, have I fallen out of love with it? Have I found a load of faults with it? That's what we're going to have a look at in this video. Let's get into it. Very quickly, just before we go any further, if you are new here to this channel, my name is Scott Edwards. I make all sorts of videography tutorials and tech related videos. So if they are the sorts of things you are interested in, consider clicking that little subscribe button just down below there and come and be a part of this community, which again is growing very quickly at the moment. So it's hugely exciting. Thank you to everyone that is subscribing and watching the videos. So typically when you first get a brand new device, whether it's a laptop, a camera, a phone, a new computer, whatever it is, you have this phase of time where you absolutely cannot find anything wrong with it because you're like, wow, I love this thing. It's so shiny. It's incredible. I'm going to look after it and make sure it works perfectly forever. Then as time goes on, you start to realize that it in effect does the same things as your old one did, and you just chuck it in your camera bag or whatever, and it starts to become dented and scratched and just used for the job that it is designed to be used for. And I can honestly say that with this MacBook Pro 14-inch, even though I've had it a couple of months now and that initial honeymoon phase is over, this isn't like that. This is completely different. Now, I have made a fair few videos on this brand new MacBook Pro 14-inch and talked about why I think it is the perfect laptop for most people. So if that is something you wanted to see, you want to go and see more videos on the MacBook Pro 14-inch, I will link a playlist up here so you can go and check it out if you would like to. But I will keep saying this until I'm blue in the face. This laptop, the cheapest brand new MacBook Pro 14-inch, will suit 90% of people, no matter what you are going to be using it for, whether it's video editing, any sort of creative work. This will suit you absolutely perfectly. You don't need to go and spec them out because this baseline model is so impressive. When it comes to power, it really is, and I'm not just saying this because a load of other people say this as well, it really is incredibly powerful. And it's crazy to think just how quick technology is moving on now. Because if you look back a couple of years to the 2019 Intel 16-inch MacBook Pro and you spec'd it out quite highly, this cheapest 14-inch model of the MacBook Pro is more powerful than a highly spec'd out 16-inch MacBook Pro from a couple of years ago. And you could have spent easily 4 or 5 grand on one of those things, and this is less than 2. That's crazy. That just shows how quickly technology really does move on. And it really goes to show that you don't necessarily need to spec this out as much as you think you do. You can get far more out of it than you might possibly think. You can put this through some seriously heavy video editing and it will not have a problem at all. Now, yes, if you are doing things like 8K video editing, you might want to go for the M1 Max, but genuinely the cheapest M1 Pro, that will cope plenty well enough. I don't know if that's very good English. Plenty well enough? I think you get what I'm trying to say. Now, the design of this is something that has split opinion quite a lot when it comes to the new design of the MacBook Pro. I personally love the design, and even after 2 or 3 months of using it, it still feels great to use. It looks absolutely brilliant as well, with the more squared off edges on the top, and you've got the nice rounded bottom. It looks kind of retro, but it still looks and feels modern as well. And it feels genuinely solid. When you open it, for example, like on previous models, the screen doesn't wobble around when you knock the table, for example. On my old 60-inch model, the screen felt almost kind of flimsy. This, it just feels solid and you have complete trust in it all of the time. And with it being slightly thicker and more rigid, I guess, you don't have trouble chucking it in your camera bag because it just feels sturdy. And yes, it is a little bit more chunky, it's slightly thicker, but that really isn't a problem, and I genuinely don't even notice it. If anything, I like the fact that it is slightly chunkier because, again, you can chuck it in your camera bag and you feel like it's not just going to snap in half because it is so thin. With it being a pro device, you want to have trust in it, and with this, you really do. Now, the port situation is something we shouldn't ever have had to talk about, because nothing should have happened a few years ago when it did. So a few years ago, Apple took all of their ports off their MacBooks and replaced them with just USB-C ports. Everyone knows what a USB-C port, they are just here. You've got 2 of them on this side, and they were the only ports you could get on any MacBook. So what that meant is if you needed to use an SD card, or you needed to plug into a HDMI port for an external monitor, you used to have to use a dongle. And if you didn't have a dongle, that meant that you couldn't use your laptop for that functionality. Now, I don't have a problem with USB-C. In fact, I think everything should be USB-C, but that's not really the case. You do need other ports to be able to get by, especially when you are creating a lot of things such as videos like this. Because my camera records onto an SD card, I need to be able to plug an SD card into my computer. And if I didn't have my dongle, I couldn't then do my editing. Now, however, they are back. We have the HDMI port, which is perfect for plugging into an external monitor, and we also have the SD card input, which is perfect for taking the SD card straight from my camera and importing footage straight to my computer, or an SSD, which I use to edit off, which connects via USB-C. So what this means is I don't need any dongles at all. I've completely escaped dongle land. And I still, to this day, even 2 or 3 months later, having owned this, I still get excited about plugging an SD card straight into the MacBook. That might sound a little bit sad. In fact, it probably is a little bit sad, but I'm not even bothered because it shouldn't have ever gone anywhere. It's good to have it back. And on that point as well, it's really nice to have MagSafe back, because now you can plug your laptop in and knock the charger and know your laptop is perfectly safe and it's not going to get dragged off the table like potentially was the case with the USB-C charger. So MagSafe is really good. And even though on the base model this is the slowest MagSafe charger, that's not the slowest port, but it comes with the slowest MagSafe charger, I don't have a problem with that. It still charges very quickly. I think this fully charges with the slowest charger in about an hour and a half. That's not very slow. It's genuinely not a problem. The screen on this MacBook Pro is genuinely insane. It is the best screen I have ever used on any sort of laptop. The contrast is incredible. The sharpness as well. It just looks so good. Obviously, it's not going to come across very well on camera like this, but you have to see it in person. The screen is just so good to work on. The colors are so accurate, the contrast is incredible, I've already said that. And the 120Hz refresh rate as well. So for example, when you're scrolling through apps like this, it just feels snappier to use because the screen is so much more adaptive to what you are doing. There's no lag at all. It's just so smooth and fluid. And when you compare that to a device that has, for example, a 60Hz refresh rate, it is really noticeable when you go between the two. If there's one complaint that I do have, is that the 120Hz refresh rate isn't used. It's not fully optimized to work with particular apps yet. It's only really the Apple apps that it works with. So one thing I would like to see is more apps be optimized to be used with the 120Hz, so it does start to feel snappier throughout everything. However, when you are using things like Apple apps, whether it's Apple Music or Safari, it just feels so fluid. And when you go from one device to another that have different refresh rates, it is really noticeable. I love the 120Hz refresh rate. Some people have said that you can't really notice a difference. I really like it, and I like the fact that it's adaptive as well. So obviously when you're not using the 120Hz, it will lower the refresh rate to save battery as well. I think that's a really useful feature. So overall, I can honestly say, and again, I've made so many videos on this because I think it is one of my favorite ever pieces of technology I've ever used. Apart from my camera that I use to record things every single day, this is one piece of tech that I use daily. I use it as much as I possibly can, and I cannot fault it in any way. Even little things like people started to complain about when it was first released, like the notch. It's just not a big deal. It really isn't. And I've said this in previous videos. If the notch is something that is stopping you buying this MacBook Pro, I don't understand why. Because you just do not notice it at all. And even when you were doing things like screen recording, it doesn't record the notch. It replaces that with an image of the screen. So you can never tell it's there anyway. And when you can see it, it's just in the menu bar. It's not taking up any of the actual screen space. And one final thing as well, it does blow my mind that it runs pretty much silently. I have heard the fans a couple of times when it's been doing some heavy rendering, but really, if you compare it to what some of the old MacBooks sounded like to what they sound like now, it is absolutely silent, and it's only very rare that you will hear the fans. It is when you are doing those slightly heavier tasks. So for example, when I have multiple layers of 4K video that are rendering, the fan might kick in, but as soon as it's rendered, the fan will stop. And that didn't used to happen on my old 16-inch MacBook Pro. That would literally sound like it was taking off, and it made any sort of sound design that I was doing pretty much impossible, even with headphones, because I could hear it through my headphones. And finally, I also think that this is the perfect size for video editing and traveling around, whether you're chucking it in your camera bag to go and edit somewhere else, work with a client. It's the perfect size because you have plenty of screen space to be able to do all of your editing, and yet it's not gonna be too heavy to carry around with you in your camera bag. It doesn't take up a load of space in your camera bag. I cannot fault it, and I'm sorry if I just sound like I'm repeating myself and making videos about the same thing all the time. I just genuinely believe that this is one of the best devices you can buy at the moment. It really is. So while the honeymoon phase might be over for this MacBook Pro and myself, it hasn't changed my thoughts on it in any way at all. And if you are thinking of taking the plunge and getting yourself a brand new MacBook Pro, I cannot recommend it enough. I think it will genuinely change the way you go about doing your work, especially if you are upgrading from a MacBook that's maybe 3 or 4 years old as opposed to 2 or 3 years old. If it's slightly older, the difference in speed and power, just mind-blowing. It really is. So I personally thought that I would regret buying this at some point. I'd get a little bit of buyer's remorse, you know, that is typical when you buy an expensive device. No, not once have I regretted buying this thing, and it's going to last me a few years. It is going to help me run my video production business that I'm setting up at the moment, which I'll have a video on coming about very soon. I don't know what else to say about it. Just go and get one. You won't regret it. I think that's it for this video. I shall see you all very soon in the next one. Still trying to learn how to make a song out of this. I don't think I'll manage it. I'm going to keep trying though. I'm going to keep trying. See you in the next one.